So now there is an afterword and 2 postscripts to this book. This is the 25th anniversary edition, and this afterword was to the 10th anniversary edition. Greetings. Oh. And this was also written by John Taylor Gatto. Greetings. As I sit here trying to think of something to say that might illuminate the effect dumbing us down continues to have on my life and the lives of others, faxes, letters, emails, notes, and manuscripts have completely taken over my 6-room apartment in Manhattan, as well as my 128-acre farm in upstate New York, each and every one bearing on some aspect of the institutional soup I began to stir with the publication of that book. My correspondents honor me with words I hardly deserve. Thank you for your dedication to the task of unraveling this pestilence. Tears come to my eyes from an odd mix of joy and anger. A former teacher had this to say: "This book tied together many loose ends that I felt intuitively but could not pin down. I bought 12 copies, sharing them with co-workers and many friends. Because of your book, one of these families has made the decision to homeschool, while several others are now contemplating doing so. Over the years, I've had nearly 1,000 letters like that, from all over the world, tying the decision to homeschool to a chance encounter with dumbing us down. From Coajimalpa, Mexico, came this one. I had refused my wife's idea to homeschool our children until I read your book. What an impact it made in my life. Now I'm happy to see the rapid development of my daughters in the loving environment of our home. So is it false modesty that forces me to say that I hardly deserve such praise? Not so, for only I can be aware of how little I had to do, consciously, with the writing of this book. More honestly, it should be seen as a book that wrote itself, using me as scribe and confessor. Over the decades since Dumbing Us Down first saw the light of day, a full 15,000 of its readers took pains to see that I knew their personal reactions to the book's ideas and to augment my insights into the dismal reality of forced schooling with their own. A dazzling, exhausting, humbling, exhilarating torrent of protest, an outrage distilled from years of confinement, limitation, and humiliation, years of intimidation, of chasing prizes not worth winning, of lost opportunities, of ruined relationships, often with one's own parents, family, neighbors, friends, and self, that came, at times, close to drowning me in grief. I could only answer a fraction of these communications, yet their cumulative presence and continual arrival, year after year, makes me conscious of just how widespread the harm institutional schooling inflicts really is, and how grimly aware its victims are of the things it has caused them to lose, the greatest of which is self-knowledge, along with, perhaps, the capacity to fully love. Dumbing Us Down has been the catalyst that floats buried memories to the surface. It reminds thousands of men and women of the moments when they struggled to be themselves, only to be broken to a meaner destiny by bells, insults, and standardized tests. The otherwise silent majority wrote to me because they wanted at least one other person to know how they had been wronged. How did I come to write Dumbing Us Down? When I won the first of my Teacher of the Year awards in 1990, I intended to do nothing at the ceremony except to thank the presenter and to wave at my daughter in the audience, or, if I were bold enough, to ask her to the podium for a public hug. I did. But on the evening before the ceremony, a student from many years past called to offer congratulations. He casually asked what I intended by way of remarks. Remarks? I set him straight, or so I thought. Nobody, I told him, wants to hear a public school teacher make a speech. There would be no remarks. But you have to make a speech, he demanded. You have to speak for me, for Wendy, for Amy, for Bruce, for Tamir, for Janet, Jane, Jill, Andy. For all your classes over the years, you have to sum up what it all meant. No one will listen, I said. I'll listen, he said. And so that's how The Psychopathic School came to be written, in one blaze of all-night coffee-drenched passion. As I expected, the officials of the school district, which actively disliked me, presenting me with a plaque in a Harlem school the next evening, neither listened nor commented on my words. But over the next 6 months, I received hundreds of requests to reprint the text. A chunk of it was even entered into the congressional record by Senator Bob Kerrey of Nebraska. The Psychopathic School, the key essay in this book, deals with a number of pathological patterns I had noticed in school children over the years, in rich kids as well as poor. My speech's rapid dissemination all over the land by word of mouth and small journal quickly led to requests for an explanation of what specific mechanisms might account for these pathologies. It was a worthy challenge that took 18 months of wrestling with myself to answer, just in time for the ceremony in Albany naming me New York State Teacher of the Year for 1991. I began to see clearly my own role in the crime. Thus parts of The 7-Lesson School Teacher comprised my acceptance speech before the State Commissioner of Education, and soon that one too was reprinted in hundreds of journals, op-ed pages, and homeschool magazines. Both of these talks were finished at the last minute, cost me a groaning to write, and did not arise from any process of ratiocination that I had been familiar with. They emerged from my fingertips in the wee hours of the morning, surprising me as much as they did my audience. Giving these speeches, and there were others, each a chapter in this book, led directly to another phenomenon, which challenged some of my most dearly held assumptions. There was an outpouring of invitations to speak to groups so diverse, had they been assembled together in one room, they surely would have killed one another. Suffice it to say that in short order a fellow from Monongahela, Pennsylvania, who had spent most of his adult life speaking to 13-year-old children, found himself speaking in the Western White House and the old Senate office building, to the Cato Institute, the Nashville Center for the Arts, the NASA Space Center's Engineers Colloquium, Apple Computers, the Eagle Forum, the United Technologies Corporation, and the Farm Commune, as well as before government bureaus in Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, Bogota, and elsewhere. Enough places to account for 1.5 million miles of travel in the past 10 years. Although I altered the rhetorical clothing to fit the various audiences and situations, my core message was, and remains, that forced institutional schooling is absolutely unreformable because it is already an unqualified success. It does brilliantly precisely what it was originally designed to do, that is, to be the educational component of a centralized mass production economy directed from a handful of command centers. Such an economy has desperate needs. In order to work, it requires a particular kind of human resource, specifically one driven to define itself by purchasing things, by owning stuff, by evaluating everything from the perspective of comfort, physical security, and status. Schools are a great mechanism to condition the onrushing generations to accept total management, to impose a kind of lifelong childishness on most of us in the interests of scientific management. Efficient management requires incomplete people to manage because whole people, or those who aspire to wholeness, reject extended tutelage. It is impossible to grow up under total management, whether that's total quality management or any other version. Centralized mass production economies, however, can demand no less than this if they are to survive. The piece Green Monongahela, like the others, was written in response to my auditor's constant questions about who I was and how I'd come to think this way. It has a hidden agenda that I'm now prepared to expose. I wanted to show all the people who bore scars from their upbringing, that experts of various stripes spin theories of lifelong limitation about, that social science is mostly hooey, and dangerous hooey at that. It exists to justify pseudo-scientifically the multiple subordinations which modern management imposes on the managed. If I could demonstrate through my own example that I turned out okay, even though I sprang from a family of eccentric geniuses who fought one another tooth and nail on a daily basis, that I became independent, self-reliant, civil, and reasonably principled, even though, had the authorities known some of the events which transpired behind our doors, we would have been in deep trouble, I might become a mirror in which others could see their own stories reflected, and affirmed. By my own example, I hoped to become a living refutation to the cult of anointed expertise which has poisoned every aspect of our liberties. Time we were done with this thing. This was once a land where every sane person knew how to build a shelter grow food, and entertain one another. Now we have been rendered permanent children. It's the architects of forced schooling who are responsible for that. I credit any success I had in finding a way to be valuable to young people to the accident of my family and the accident of growing up in a place, Monongahela, where people punched anyone who minded their business too closely, and to the fact that my libertarian upbringing turned me inadvertently into a saboteur of oppressive schemes. Lest that pass as idle hyperbole, let me confess that every single day of my life as a school teacher I chanted a litany to myself while shaving in the morning. In it I pledged to find, that very day, a way, however small, to throw sand in the gears of the system. Some day I'll write about the particulars, but probably under a nom de plume, because the details would surely result in a stretch behind bars. I urge all of you who ask me about what to do in your own schools to become such saboteurs, to become little drops of water that erode this wasteland of forced institutional schooling. The last two essays in the book, We Need Less School, Not More, and The Congregational Principle, represent my attempts to find the broad outlines of a solution to the problem of modern schooling. Once, long ago, we had the problem solved and became a beacon of hope to others because of it. The rise of industrial society, with cheap and unlimited energy promising riches without precedent, if only the liberty impulses of ordinary people could be reined in, covered the traces of those earlier discoveries, yet not so deeply that they can't be unearthed again, that they can't be resurrected and become the banner to follow. Read these essays slowly, forgetting how comprehensively schooling destroyed your grasp of the vital nature of historical understanding. Argue with the nuances of my reasoning. The best America is about argument, not about premature consensus. Both pieces explore inexpensive alternatives to the inane institution that chokes the life out of our children. Since Dumbing Us Down, I've written 4 other books. One, an epic poem still unpublished called The Adventures of Snyder, the CIA Spider. But Dumbing Us Down remains my favorite because it opened my eyes to the harm I had caused in order to make a living. These days I'm trying to build a rural retreat and library on 128 acres I own in upstate New York. I want to call the place Solitude, and that name will explain almost everything about it. If I hadn't owned that land and been able to escape the cacophony of New York City to be with myself from time to time, my spirit surely would have perished, my soul been mutilated beyond repair. I'm only 100,000 or so short of finishing the thing, so if you hear of an angel, let me know. I'd hoped to use the first Solitude retreat to show every town and village, every big city neighborhood, how easy and valuable it is to provide such a public resource, a place where one can be alone with oneself, with no schedule, no agenda, no lectures, no classes, no planned recreation. And I'm up to some major mischief, trying to produce a long definitive documentary film about the history and the anomalies of, as well as the antidotes for, modern institutional forced schooling. I'm only 6 or 7 million short on that project, but a script is in hand, a national network of assistants created, a production crew organized, and a sample made. If you think of Ken Burns' Civil War, you'll get an idea of the scope of the project. Incidentally, the former student who badgered me into writing Psychopathic School, and through it this entire book, is a fine filmmaker. He'll be the director. But these undertakings are discussed at some length on my website, johntaylorgatto.com, where if the daemon overtakes you, you can also send me your thoughts from time to time. I can't promise to answer, because like you, I'm often overwhelmed, but I do promise to read every communication twice, and to think hard about what you say. And if our paths ever cross, the first Iron City is on me. God's mercy on us all. John Taylor Gatto, Oxford, New York, January 2002. Postscript 2005, from the publisher. On April 7, 2004, the Mid-Hudson Highland Post carried an article about an appearance that John Gatto made at Highland High School. Headlined, Rendered Speechless, the report was subtitled, Advocate for Education Reform Brings Controversy to Highland. The article relates the events of March 25, evening of that year, when the second half of John Gatto's presentation was canceled by the school superintendent, following complaints from the Highland Teachers Association that the presentation was too controversial. On the surface, the cancellation was in response to a video presentation that showed some violence. But retired student counselor Paul Jankiewicz begged to differ, pointing out that none of the dozens of students he talked to afterward were inspired to violence. In his opinion, few people opposing Gatto had seen the video presentation. Rather, they were taking the lead from the teachers' union, who were upset at the whole tone of the presentation. He continued, Mr. Gatto basically told them that they were not serving kids well, and that students needed to be told the truth, be given real-life learning experiences, and be responsible for their own education. Gatto questioned the validity and relevance of standardized tests, the prison atmosphere of the schools, and the lack of relevant experience given students. He added that Gatto had also had an important message for parents, that you have to take control of your children's education. Highland High School senior Chris Hart commended the school board for bringing Gatto to speak, and wished that more students had heard his message. Senior Katie Hanley liked the lecture for its new perspective, adding that it was important because it started a new exchange and got students to think for themselves. High school junior King Guo found Gatto inspiring. Highland teacher Aliza Driller Colangelo was also inspired by Gatto and commended the risk-takers, saying that, following the talk, her class had an exciting exchange about ideas. Concluded Jankiewicz, the students were eager to discuss the issues raised. Unfortunately, our school did not allow that dialogue to happen, except for a few teachers who had the courage to engage the students. What was not reported in the newspaper is the fact that the school authorities called the police to intervene and restore the peace, which ironically enough was never in the slightest jeopardy, as the student audience was well behaved and attentive throughout. A scheduled evening meeting at the school between Gatto and the Parents' Association was peremptorily forbidden by the school district authorities in a final assault on the principles of free speech and free assembly. There could be no better way of demonstrating the lasting importance of John Taylor Gatto's work, and of this small book, than this sorry tale. It is a measure of the power of Gatto's ideas, their urgency, and their continuing relevance that school authorities are still trying to shut them out 12 years after their initial publication, afraid even to debate them. May the crusade continue. Chris Plant, New Society Publishers, February 2005. Postscript, 2017, from the publisher. In 2002, when I joined New Society Publishers, I was given a handful of books that were a clear reflection of New Society's mission and mandate to further educate myself. One of those books was a previous edition of Dumbing Us Down. Such a little book, I thought I might take a few minutes and flip through it. I took it home to the house I shared with my 4-year-old son. And all my plans changed. My son was set to start school later that year, but this little book packed a mighty punch, strong enough to convince me, a full-time, employed, single mom, to homeschool for 3 years. In my situation, that's all I could manage. I was incredibly fortunate to work for New Society, which has a strong family-first policy, and for a few years I was able to balance a full-time job and homeschooling. Most importantly, I assembled the tools I needed to enable me to take control of my son's education, and I was able to help him assemble an equally important toolkit to allow him to follow his curiosity and develop strong critical thinking and reasoning skills, all of which help him to better navigate a rapidly changing world. In turn, Gatto's work has shaped my own navigations, providing an as-needed booster shot to strengthen my own skills and follow my own curiosity. In fact, it was my incredible honor to serve as his editor for the subsequent Weapons of Mass Instruction. Working closely with John through that process showed me even more clearly what a towering but gentle and kind intellect he truly possesses, and that he's made it his mission to use this tool for the betterment of all of us. As Christopher Plant, founding publisher of New Society Publishers, said in his own comments about this book in 2005, it is a measure of the power of Gatto's ideas, their urgency, and their continuing relevance that school authorities are still trying to shut them out 12 years after their initial publication, afraid even to debate them. Now, 25 years after their publication, in these increasingly turbulent times, Gatto's ideas are still under fire. thrown up against standardized testing, slashed school budgets, burnt-out teachers, or any of the multitude of assaults on the education system. It becomes ever more important for us to take back control of our children's and our own learning. What a deep debt of gratitude we owe to Mr. Gatto, and what amazing things he's accomplished with this small, mighty book. Ingrid Wittvoet, Managing Editor, Gabriola Island, BC, March 2017.